Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 14th and tonight's movie is The Exorcist 3. While I don't think that the original Exorcist movie is one of the best horror movies of all time by today's standards, it was ahead of its time and I do think it has earned the reputation it has. But I have heard talk that The Exorcist 3 is kind of underrated. You might be wondering why I'm not reviewing the second one, and that's a silly question, but I will answer it. That's because The Exorcist 2 does not count. The Exorcist 3 is kind of interesting because it is directed by the author of the original Exorcist novel. And while he did write the screenplay for the first movie, he didn't direct it. But with him writing and directing, we get to see what the author of the Exorcist novel will make when he has complete creative control over a movie. This is about a supernatural serial killer and getting to the bottom of it, as well as figuring out a connection it has with the exorcism of Regan from the original movie. I am very curious to see how this movie turns out. I'm gonna go give it a watch. First things first, apparently William Blatty did not have complete creative control over this movie. There were some disagreements between him and the studio, but the final product was still really great. I'm giving it the same rating that I gave the original Exorcist, 9 out of 10. The original was more consistent. The Exorcist 3 had lower lows, but also higher highs. I think most people point to two specific highlights from this film. The first is quite possibly one of the most effective jump scares in movie history. I know that a lot of people, myself included, kind of use jump scares like a negative thing. They're not bad if they're done right. It's just very easy to not do it right. Learning about that scene is what got me interested in watching this movie, and I've seen it multiple times before, but even watching it now, the ending sort of made my blood rush. If you're interested, look up Exorcist 3 hospital scene. It's very effective without context, but in context it's even more effective. The second highlight is the performance of Brad Dourif as the Gemini Killer. People talk a lot about Linda Blair's performance in the original, and that was really good, but this performance, I think it's one of the best I've ever seen in anything. It's like if you mixed the demon-possessed Regan with Hannibal Lecter. And one thing I noticed is that even though this guy is just completely losing it, he is yelling, he's screaming, he's making weird demonic roars, like there were a lot of points where I noticed that the actor was actually crying while doing it. Which I think is supposed to signify that the person that body belonged to is still in a part there and watching this happen. This raises the question, with such amazing things in this movie, why is it sort of mixed in reception? Well, when it's good, it's absolutely amazing, but there's also a lot of really weird decisions made in this movie. There's a lot of really weird conversations in this movie, like long, extended conversations. I'm not going to say they're pointless, I'm just going to say that they were executed in a way I didn't get. And there's this dream sequence at the end of the first act that is one of the weirdest things I've ever seen in a horror movie, and not in like a, ooh, that's spooky way, it's just in a why kind of way. I also wasn't a fan of George C. Scott's character, the lieutenant. Like, there's the grizzled, curmudgeonly policeman, and then there's this guy. I can tell he wasn't supposed to be all that likable, but he is the person we're following for the entire movie, so him not being likable can affect things. And while the movie is good with horror for the most part, there were a few moments that were supposed to be scary that were just weird. However, there are other points where the screenplay is really good. There were a couple moments that actually made me laugh in this movie, and they didn't feel forced or out of place. The Exorcist is a very consistently good, scary horror movie. The Exorcist 3 is a lot more all over the place, but some of the places that it goes are amazing. If you like The Exorcist, I would recommend that you watch it. Even if you don't like it, it's still very interesting. And now I want to talk about a few spoilers. The big jump scare scene in this movie is the death of one of the nurses at the hospital where a majority of the movie takes place. You see this nurse in the background a lot. She's wearing this bright red coat. You hear her talk a couple times, but she just seems like a background character. There is so much that can be said about how effective this scene is, and so much has been said. I've seen videos analyzing it. This scene has it all. A really long build-up, it's like 5 minutes in length, a fake-out scare halfway through, and the way that they ended it was really clever. One of the things that filmmakers use to make jump scares more effective is misdirection, making the audience look away from where the scare is actually going to happen. And in this one, they make you look away from a certain door by having the nurse go in the room, look around the room, find nothing, leave, then turn off the light and lock the door behind her. There is no reason to think there's anything in this room. But the moment she turns around and walks away, the door is flung open and this white hooded figure comes storming out with a giant pair of garden shears. There's also a noise that happens in the score that might just set off your fight or flight response. So yeah, that's a very effective scene. Like, that's a jump scare that they earned. Anyway, the body that the Gemini killer, because the Gemini killer was a serial killer that was executed with the electric chair, but his spirit possessed the body of Damien Karras from the original Exorcist, either as he was about to die or like right after he died. Apparently it took a while for him to start the metabolic processes back up, 15 years. This all was apparently orchestrated by Pazuzu, the demon that possessed Reagan in the first movie. This is all a way to punish Damien Karras for stopping it. The Gemini killer never leaves the room that he's kept in at this hospital. It's like maximum security. He like passes out and he's able to possess other people to do the murders for him. The way that this movie ends is actually quite a bit like the way that the original Exorcist ended. An exorcist comes and tries to do the exorcism, ultimately fails, and then there's a moment where Damien takes control and, well, in the first movie he killed himself, but in this one he begs the police lieutenant to shoot him. So once again, Damien Karras dying was able to succeed where exorcism had failed. The original Exorcist is a classic for a reason. It does so many things right. This is a little bit more out there, but I think it is worth a watch. Is it as good as the original? I'd say yes with an asterisk beside it. If you value consistency, The Exorcist is definitely better than Exorcist 3. But overall, I really think that this was about as good as the first one. So yeah, thank you for listening. I'll see you tomorrow.